And welcome to our, I think it's now our fourth or fifth Meet the Professionals and talking about various things. Today we're going to be talking about benefits, and obviously we thank you to those people who have sent in questions already. We've got obviously three people to help us out tonight and obviously answer all our questions. Likewise, what we've done before, if you've got any questions which haven't been asked, or as we get going through it, suddenly sparks some interest in about asking another question, please feel free to drop it into the chat function, and obviously we'll go through as many questions as possible during the course of tonight. Obviously, first of all, I need to welcome and introduce our professionals. So we've got Kamran, who was born and bred in the West Midlands, so fairly local to me. Studied medicine at Sheffield University and then went to practice being a training as a surgeon in Newcastle upon time before moving back to general practice. He moved to the Midlands in 2009 and since worked as GP in Wolverhampton, and he's also worked for the Justice as a Department of Justice as a social entitlement tribunal member and has an interest in the benefit system, hence his interest in being here tonight. Also enjoys sports and received national recognition for volunteering, especially for his services to boxing. Obviously, proud father of Zayn, if I've said that correctly. I hope I have.
Zayn, but yeah, cool.
Who's now 6, and obviously he spent 6 months in Birmingham Children's when he was first born. So obviously he's got a clinical insight to having a TOF OA, and obviously he's a parent as well, and obviously the long-term illness. Dr. Caroline Love, obviously I've known her for a long time. Used to be a council and management member of TOFS, but obviously now is a valuable member of TOFS Pastoral Support Subcommittee. And obviously she is an associate specialist in the dermatology at York Hospital, where she's worked for 12 years. Dr. Love studied medicine at the University of Liverpool and began her career as psychiatry in the Northwest and changed to dermatology later on and continued this work in York. As a doctor and an adult TOF herself, obviously great experience being that adult TOF, lots of valuable knowledge there, which she's got. We're delighted to obviously invite her to speak, she spoke at the adult conference in 2018, and obviously we'll get her back again at some point soon to another conference. And she also has written an article about life as OA TOF, which was jointly written by Professor Alan Maurice, who many of you will also know as well, which was published in the British Medical Journal. And she's obviously very experienced in applying for PIPs and her patients with chronic illness and in dermatology. And obviously she enjoys reading and spending time with her baby nieces and friends during her social time, given anything if you have any during this pandemic. And finally, we've got Heather, who obviously became involved in TOFS when she was pregnant at 29 weeks with a second child who was suspected of having TOF OA. She has over 20 years of experience doing benefit claims and helping others and dealing with her own son Robert's claims. Heather is currently a moderator on the Disability Benefits Facebook group, which is called, I believe, Disability Benefits UK. So it may be something that if you are thinking about applying, have a look at that. She spends her time reading, and especially crime fictions, and an active member of Girl Guiding. And we're currently running Rainbows and Brownies, which is exactly the same as my wife. Previously held the position of Special Needs Advisor at St Helens Division, and she's been a leader for now for 20 years. So welcome, thank you all. And so let's get going with the first question. So Heather, what are PIPs and DLA, and how can I improve my application to get the highest rate?
Thanks, Duncan. First of all, DLA is Disability Living Allowance, and that is for children under 16. Having a medical condition doesn't mean that you're automatically entitled to it. For DLA, a child has to have additional needs that require extra care or extra mobility needs compared to other children of the same age. There's 3 rates. You've got three rates for care, I should say. Low rate care, which is at least an hour a day of extra needs. Middle rate care, which is a significant part of the day or a significant part of the night. and high rate care, which is a significant part of the day and night. Mobility has two parts, which are high rate mobility from age 3 years and low rate mobility, which is from age 5 years. The criteria is different. For the high rate mobility, you need to be virtually unable to walk. For the low rate, it's more about supervision. Obviously, with DLA, with children with TOF and OA, a lot will be based around the eating, feeding, nutrition side of things, but a lot of children do have other conditions as well. To qualify, you need to have had the needs for at least 3 months and expect them to last for a further 6 months. Obviously, with long-term conditions like TOF and OA, you'd easily fulfill that. I've been told by some people that it's impossible to get it for a baby. It isn't. Robert had it from 3 months old at high rate care. PIP, or Personal Independence Payment, has been with us since 2013, and that took over from DLA for adults, so it's for over 16s. It's a point-based system, and there are 10 questions on daily living, 2 questions on mobility, and the idea is basically to score your points. You need 8 points to get a standard award on either daily living or mobility, plus 12 points to get the enhanced rate. Because your child's on DLA, it does not mean that they will automatically be able to get PIP, although obviously the aim for you is to try to improve the chances. When you're applying for PIP, I suggest that people read the descriptors carefully and then start to provide evidence to support their claim. So being on a Facebook group where I'm a moderator and having helped people with their claims in the past, those who just say, I can't do this, I need help with that, and don't provide any additional evidence, don't tend to score very well at all. On the other hand, if you actually provide the evidence and preferably relate it to your condition, then you're much more likely to be successful first time round. So I don't know whether anybody wants to add anything there. I feel
when I was prepping for this, I found on the Citizens Advice site there are a couple of downloadable diaries for people to keep their at least a couple of weeks of your activities over the week, how much support you need from others, if it's for PIP, how much support you're giving your child, and supervision, and how much time that's taking up over that time. How long you do it for would depend on how variable the condition is. If there's certain things that take a long time, every couple of weeks, then you would need to keep it for a longer time period. If it's pretty much the same day in, day out, then a good week will give you an idea of how to fill in the form better.
Yeah, that's part of, I'd agree, that's part of evidence that can be used to show your child's needs, or as an adult, show your own needs. So.
Okay.
So I think I just want to make a couple of kind of summarizing points on that. So the benefit assessment is really, for DLA, it seems to be much stronger about clinical diagnosis and clinical perception by whoever's doing the assessment. Whereas for PIP, it's very much based on functional. So it's what you can do. So if I give an example for older adults, there are some people out there who have a heart attack and are basically bedridden. There are equally people out there who have 5 heart attacks and then run the London Marathon. So the diagnosis in that case isn't relevant. What is relevant is what they can do from a function point of view. And so for both of these benefits, the PIP and the DLA, it's very important that you try and focus on what your function level is at and what impairs your function, rather than spending a lot of time focusing on the clinical aspects. More so with DLA, there tends to be a decision made based on what you write in the form for diagnosis. So people know that children with certain conditions will have an impairment, and that's very well clinically documented, and so they can make a decision on that. But inevitably for DLA and PIP, there is some form of assessment process, and that's where people get tangled up, and that's where we can try and help support some of that assessment function today. I think for me, the key tips, if you're doing the forms, is the forms are available as a writable PDF document online, and you're in a much better position to download that document and complete the form on a computer and then save it somewhere. And usually I tell people to date stamp it, so write on it June 2021, because inevitably with DLA and also with PIP, you'll be asked to reapply every so often. And if you've got the original form, you can go back to it, change the details that apply, and then send off the new version. It's much quicker to do. So those people who had the kind of nightmare of filling out this form, it's more like a textbook than a form. And so it's worth keeping that textbook saved somewhere, changing the sections that are relevant every couple of years when they ask you to reapply, and then sending it again. Equally, if you are subject to an appeal or tribunal, at least you've got a copy of your form that you can refer back to. So quite often people will say, well, I can't remember what I put in that section. I can't remember if I wrote about that particular bit or not. And actually it's worth having a copy of the form on your desktop, on your computer, so that you can refer back to it quite often. And I think finally for me, the language is important on these forms. So what you do, how often you do things, is very, very relevant from the legal aspect. So when they're looking at forms, when you say that I can do X, Y, and Z, the assessment that they're making is how often do you have an impairment doing that job or role. And it can be every day, it can be every few days, it can be occasional. And you tend to find that it's important that you clarify exactly where you sit with those.
With the DLA, you have to be affected around about 5 days out of 7, and for PIP it's about 50% of the time. So the point about writing how frequently these things occur is obviously a very important one.
Okay, thank you for that all. Next question, Caroline. Who should I ask to complete the professional section of the form?
Here it's about which professionals know your child's illness best, who knows most about the condition and its impact on your life and on your child's life. So for TOF children, areas around feeding, tube feeding, the impact on night times and schools. If you're not sure that this person's got a full picture, if you've not seen them for a while, then you ought to ring them up or get a clinic appointment and discuss with them that you're applying for DLA or PIP and the problems you're having. Otherwise, they don't, although they know for example, your pediatric surgeon will know the details of the operation, but they don't necessarily know that you're up all night every night because your child's choking several times a night. They don't know that you're doing twice as much laundry because they're refluxing and vomiting over all the sheets every night. And they don't know that the child's missing half of school because they're poorly all the time. I mean, you would hope they would know some of that, but it's important to check out what they know and what they don't know, because they can't fill out the form with that information if they don't know it. Which specialists you get involved would be which ones is the key area for you. Obviously, you have the regular TOFs. You also have ones with VACTERL and other syndromes. For me, if I was to fill it out, then my respiratory problems are the main issues. But for other people, it would be the gastrointestinal issues. For children, it would usually be your pediatric surgeon if it was TOF based, or a support nurse you might have. Or it may be a pediatrician if there are other, if there is a wider range of disabilities here. You can also, your GP may not be the best person to fill it out unless they have a detailed knowledge of your conditions and you see them very regularly, as you may be getting most of your support from your specialist about that condition, or they may not see many patients with your condition regularly. If they are the person you liaise with most, then that's a different matter. If there are other specialists you feel would add additional evidence, such as speech and language therapists, psychologists, dietitians, you can ask them to do a written report about their knowledge for the DLA form. You'd also want to consider, if they are at school, are they needing additional support and supervision at school? And is that person able to fill out the question there about additional support at school, supervision at school as well? For PIP, the supporting evidence is more diverse. It's not just from specialists, you can also include hospital discharge letters, letters from hospital specialists to your GP about your condition. But you need to focus on the function there. What is it affecting in your function? Because that's more important for that assessment. If you have dietitian input and a nutrition plan and management plan and tube feeding regime, that's supporting evidence for your functional issues there. Let's see, where is it? And you also need to check for both of them, if the specialist is going to charge a fee, how much you can afford from a number of different specialists. If you've got 5 or 6 different people involved in your care, can you afford to pay for them if they're all going to charge you a fee? And you have to then work out which are the ones that are going to be able to provide you the most value for the form. You can also include supporting letters from carers or family members, which is slightly different, but they can provide a different point of view about your function, that things that they may have noticed about your function that you haven't spotted yourself. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in at that point.
Regarding evidence, oh, sorry, go on, Cam.
No, sorry, go on, Heather. Go on.
Right. I was going to say, regarding evidence, rather than somebody completing the professional section, because obviously you've mentioned about people who can provide evidence. I found that doing a list of aids and adaptations, Robert has multiple disabilities, and the list of aids and adaptations, including the medical department that came from, physio, OT, places like that, that was quite helpful because it showed the range that he actually needs. Obviously, you might not get for a child who has TOF and OA, but not many more additional needs. They're not going to necessarily have a wet room put in and things like that. But for those that have got multiple disabilities, it can be useful to show the amount of things that have had to be provided to help to make life a little bit more manageable.
Okay, Cameron?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so as I mentioned before about having that PDF document on your desktop of the form, what you can do is put a list of all the professionals that are involved at the time. And actually, it will surprise you that when you go back a couple of years and look at the form that you did 2 years ago, and you think, my God, look how many people were involved then. And we've got this extra person that I completely forgot that were involved because, you know, I've already spoken to them once in the last couple of months. And actually, you miss people out. So it's much better to keep a list of all the professionals that are involved. What I would say, though, is that actually you don't need any professional to complete the professional section of the form. What I've tended to find is more handy is keep a copy of your most recent clinic letters with those professionals. So if you're seeing a surgeon, keep the last clinic letter from the surgeon. If you're seeing a respiratory consultant, keep that last clinic letter. If you're seeing a dietitian, a SALT team, keep their last clinic letter and photocopy those letters and send them off. Never send the originals because you won't get them back, but photocopy those letters and send them off. And that will complete the professional section. As a GP myself and a father of a 6-year-old with TOF, my son Zayn has never seen a doctor outside of hospital. Okay, so if I went to my GP and said, please, can you do me a professional letter? They've got no idea. Actually, they probably don't even know what Zayn looks like, let alone the conditions or the issues. And they won't know what the form is looking for. So as I said at the start, the form is looking for your function, how you function on a day-to-day basis. No GP is able to tell you exactly what you're functioning on a day-to-day basis, whatever your disability or your need. And therefore, you won't get the detail that you want, and you may be paying quite a bit of money. I know in some parts of the country, it's 60, 70, 80 pounds for a GP letter. So you'll be paying quite a lot of money for something that will add very little value or weight to your application. What will add significant weight is the letters from the hospital clinics. And then if you want to, if you've got even a friend in a professional role who wants to put in that actually, as Caroline mentioned about those functional duties that you have to do more of because of your child's illness, then it's worth getting them to document those for you. But the key is to make sure that you remember exactly what you put in the form, because if it does come to challenge or appeal, you want to be in a position where you can reel off what was on your form.
Can I just add as well, I noticed somebody asked in the chat function about appointment letters. An appointment letter itself doesn't necessarily add any value. It just shows that you've got an appointment. The reports that Cameron's mentioned are far, far better because that actually explains what's been discussed and decided in the appointment. Some people. Sorry, go on.
Sorry, as I said, technically you have an obligation to ask for a copy of the letter from every clinic appointment you attend. So I would encourage everybody, it doesn't cost the hospital anything extra. It takes a couple of seconds for the secretary to print out and post a copy to you. But I'd ask everybody, don't feel embarrassed or worried that, you know, what the surgeon thinks, just to say, can I have a copy of the clinic letter, please, from this appointment? And once you get into a habit of getting a copy of those letters, keep a little file, which soon turns into a big file actually, but keep a file of those letters, and then don't send all of it off, but the most recent letter will have enough details to send off.
Okay, thank you for that. Heather, I am eligible for carers allowance, and who can claim?
Right, the first thing about carers allowance is that children under 16 can't claim it. I have been asked before whether children under 16 can claim. No, they can't. To claim carers allowance, the person that you're caring for, I'll say child in this case, because for a lot of people it's going to be the parents that are listening in. Your child needs to be in receipt of DLA or PIP. There are a couple of other benefits such as attendance allowance, but that refers to pensioners. So first of all, they must have a qualifying benefit in place. If it's DLA, it needs to be at middle or high rate care, and if it's PIP, it needs to be one of the daily living awards, which is either standard or enhanced. If you do apply for carers allowance, you have to be caring for the person for at least 35 hours a week. You can't earn more than £128 a week after tax and certain expenses. Now, if you're on £128 a week, you're not paying tax anyway, but that's the way the government describes it. Certain expenses include 50% of your pension, or paying somebody to look after your child, so long as the person you're paying is not an immediate family member. So you can't be in full-time education, although part-time students, providing they're not doing more than 21 hours, including home reading and home study, part-time students can claim. And I actually claimed carers allowance when I did my degree part-time. Also, carers allowance stops when you reach state pension age, assuming that you can claim the full state pension. If you can't claim the full state pension, you might get a partial amount of carers allowance that makes it up to the right amount. And carers allowance is currently £67.60 a week.
Okay, Caroline, anything to add?
No.
Cameron? Okay.
No.
That's great, thank you.
It's comprehensive.
Right. Very so. So Caroline, if I was awarded DLA stroke PIP, what other benefits should I look at to claim?
This is more about, I mean, Heather's just discussed the carers allowance and attendance allowance. There's more benefits to claim, rather that your existing benefits are going to be enhanced. So if you're awarded DLA, you can get higher payments for the family, for child tax credit, for housing benefit, for universal credit, and you're also exempt from the benefits cap. If you get the higher award for mobility, which will probably affect less TOFs, but some of the more complex TOFs with other issues, you do get exempt from the vehicle tax. You will be entitled to a disabled badge, and that can save you a lot on parking. And you may also get a mobility vehicle, or a taxi fare allowance if you can't drive, for example, or your family. PIP is a little bit more complicated. You do get a disability premium on some of the older benefits if you're still claiming those, such as income support, income-based job seekers allowance and housing benefit, but unfortunately it doesn't apply to universal credit. You do, however, get exemptions from the benefit cap, and you or your partner can get enhanced working tax credit if you get the enhanced daily living element of PIP. If you're not getting Motability, in some areas you are entitled to a disabled person's bus pass, disabled people's train card. That only gets you a third off fares though. And if you're on a means tested benefit, you can get reductions or waived prescription charges and dental costs If you're not, then I would say the best thing since sliced bread, and if you're getting multiple prescriptions as an adult, is the prepayment prescription card. It's £10 a month for 10 months of the year, which is essentially one prescription per month. If you're getting multiple prescriptions per month, it's paid for itself within the first couple of months of the year. That's not an additional benefit, but that's something I'd recommend all my patients get, and I've got one myself, because it just saves so much money on prescription charges.
Okay. Just looking at the chat function, somebody's put in there, I'm entitled to maternity allowance for 9 months, and was planning to go back to work after 6, but because of weaning and everything else, planning to now take full 12 months. Obviously, there's 3 months there, gap of no payment or anything else. Is there anything that they're entitled to claim for during that 3 months? And also, somebody else has asked is, can you claim carer's allowance while you're on maternity leave? So I don't know who wants to take that first.
Well, on the carer's allowance thing, I'm not sure how much maternity leave is at the moment, but I think it's about £140 a week. I don't know whether anybody wants to correct me if I'm wrong. And if I'm right, that's more than 128, which means that the carer's allowance wouldn't be able to be claimed.
Okay.
But you can claim you can apply for DLA for the child.
Yeah.
And that can act as a supplementary income. What I would say is that it's worth having a chat with the employer about whether those 3 months can be taken as a sickness or as a something to do with leave through their role. So if they can roll up their annual leave for the following year, bring that forward and take that and take some time through that. But from the point of view of the gap of 3 months, if they weren't planning to go back. So I read it as they were planning to go back at 9 months, but now they're not. But if they weren't planning, if they were trying to get a bit longer off, then have a word with the employer. Some employers have quite a compassionate scheme in those situations, and they can try and see if they can support. The other option really is to move on to a sickness pay. So get a sick note for yourself from the doctor, and then you get statutory sick pay as well as the payment for the DLA for the child if you applied. I think that would be an option.
Sorry, I was going to say nothing might be to consider might be universal credit, because obviously where you've got, say, 2 adults who are both working, they might not be entitled to universal credit. But once you've got a child, then you've got an additional element, and you may then be entitled to it. And if the child gets DLA, then there's an additional element for that as well. And even if you're working, you can get the carer element if your child gets DLA. It does sound quite complicated. It does get complicated. But I can list the different elements if that's helpful at a later date.
Duncan, just to provide a bit of clarity on PIP. So the best way to think of PIP is it's a benefit to help you live a normal way of life if you have a disability or something that impairs your way of life. So therefore, it doesn't entitle you automatically to universal credit or any of the employment-related benefits. So there are some people who have a disability, claim PIP, but then continue to work in a normal working role. So they don't claim ESA or universal credit. Equally, there are people whose disabilities are such that they can claim for the disability, but also the disability hinders them from working, in which case they can apply for both universal credit and PIP. But it's not a given that if you get PIP, you can also claim universal credit. So just to clarify that.
Universal credit is a means tested benefit, whereas PIP is not, basically, isn't it? So
yeah, but PIP is very much to try and help people with disability lead a normal life, which includes working. If you can't do the working element of a normal life, then you claim universal credit.
Thank you for that. I know this has come up in the chat, but it's also one of our questions. So Heather, who can I approach for extra help in completing the application, particularly obviously because it's so overwhelming, either face-to-face or over the phone to make sure that the application is correct?
Right, first of all, COVID has obviously put a stop to a lot of the face-to-face stuff. Although there may well still be phone lines available, but some areas are overwhelmed. Citizens' advice is one that's frequently mentioned. Does depend on whether you've got a good CAB near you or not. Some are better than others, in all honesty. The one near me isn't what I'd call brilliant, but others have had great success. I've never used them myself, but I do know people who've used them. A lot of councils have a welfare rights officer, and they can very often help. If they are booked up for weeks in advance, which they sometimes are, they will also know of any local disability advice centres or anything along those lines in your area where people may be able to get help. If you live in social housing, some housing officers have got some experience in filling in DLA and PIP forms. I know the one in St Helens, they've helped people, as I know. My local carers centre fills them in as well for you. But again, that may be dependent on the centre itself. And in the case of school age children, if they've got other needs in particular, very often the special needs coordinator will be able to help as well. I would say after all that there are paid services, but I wouldn't recommend them. They can be very expensive and they can only write what you tell them. So in a lot of cases, I would say you are the best person to fill in the form if you can. You know your child better than anybody, or if you're an adult TOF, you know your own needs better than anybody. It looks really, really daunting when you look at the forms. They're about 40 pages long and you take one look at it and think, can't do that. But in many, many cases you can. It just takes a bit of time. What I do with Robert's forms, I have a new pad, I write one question on each page of the pad, and I keep going back to it and jotting down things. That's the way I work. I've always written the forms. I know that Cameron suggested typing them up, which is a fantastic idea, but I didn't use a computer when I first started doing Robert's forms. I've still got photocopies of handwritten forms that are 20 odd years old, some of them now. But remember that whoever fills in your form, it's only based on the information that you can give them. So in a lot of cases, you are the best person. It is a case of taking your time, going back, jotting things down or adding things onto the computer. But very often you are the person who's going to be able to make the most success of the form because you're the one who knows your child best. But there are places who are available. They tend to work from a template and can only work on the information that you give them in the first place.
Thanks for that. Quick question. Somebody's put in the chat, can I apply now I've got a 4-year-old TOF? I presume there is no limit in terms of when you can apply for this, but just to clarify if somebody can.
Yeah, they can still apply now. It all depends on whether the child has extra needs compared to other children of the same age. Now, at 4 years old, it's quite possible that they still have a lot of problems with the feeding side of things, possibly with choking, waking up at night, things like that compared to other children. There's absolutely nothing to stop them applying now, providing they have the needs for at least 3 months, which they will have had, and they're expecting them to last 6 months or more.
Okay.
And
I think the important,
sorry, go on.
I think the important thing as well is to focus on specifically the additional needs he has compared to other 4-year-olds, not additional needs he has because he's a child. All children will need extra support, but
yes,
you want to say what is different to him to his friends, your other children when they were 4, because that's the key difference that will get you the points in the, well, it's not points for DLA, but that will get you
a better chance of an award.
A better chance, yes.
Yeah, yeah. That's why I always say compared to other children of the same age. Somebody's just posted in the chat about can they apply for a 4-month-old? Yes. Yeah. I had high rate care from 3 months for Robert. You just need that 3-month allowance beforehand.
Okay. I think that just to add on to that, so obviously if you're 4-month-old, you won't be making a claim against the mobility element. That's it. No, so it's just being very careful. Obviously, 4-month-old, we won't expect to mobilise or walk independently. So that's not, and so when it comes to filling out the application form, just be very focused on the things that actually apply rather than thinking that you need to put a comment in every box. So quite a lot of people will try and do a scatter, especially more with PIP, try and do a scattergun approach where they try and pick up points in every section. Actually, it's much more useful to focus on the areas that massively apply and get all the points in those areas than trying to pick small points off other areas. And I think from the point of view of the application, there's quite a lot of, not at the moment because of COVID, but there are quite a lot of universities who link their law students to some of the citizens advice and welfare rights organisations. So you may get some kind of pseudo legal support, especially with appeals. So we quite often see when people go to appeal that some of the forms are filled in by trainee lawyers, and there's actually been some success legally with legal students challenging decisions at the tribunals at the Department of Justice. So it's worth, don't shy away from approaching citizens advice. People kind of think, oh, they're only there for giving me tour maps and guides. Actually, they have a wealth of knowledge and they have legal teams that work for them. So they're very, very much worth approaching, and they can guide you towards organisations like welfare rights and other systems that are provided by your local authority.
There is just one other thing as well. If you really can't find somebody to fill in the form for you and you really need help, if you phone PIP, I believe that they can arrange a call back and a member of DWP staff will help.
Yeah.
Caroline?
Yeah.
Oh, I can't think of the site now. I think it might even be, if it's one of the disabilities rights sites, it might even be yours, Heather, where there is a guide to some of the language that's used in the questions. If it's not just how to fill out the form that's a problem, if you're not sure what the words mean in that context, then there are places online you can find that to help you understand what they're asking.
I think it's possibly either Disability Rights UK, which is a website rather than a Facebook group, which I'm part of a Facebook group. And there's also Benefits and Work. Now, Benefits and Work do have a monthly subscription, but you can access an awful lot without paying the monthly subscription. And I've never paid the monthly subscription. So, but there are also Facebook groups as well, lots other than my own. And generally speaking, there's information in the files as well. And of course, you've got the government websites, or website, I should say, that's got sections as well.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Cameron, you've already made reference to it in terms of what makes a good application, in terms of what, point scores, making sure you only fill out the sections which obviously apply and everything else. But what is the process if a claim is rejected and somebody wants to appeal to that rejection?
Cool. So I think it's worth understanding the process of the application and what happens next to understand the points of rejection. So when you apply, the application form is looked over by somebody from a clinical and from a benefits background, and they can sometimes make a decision just on the application, especially for DLA. More often for PIP, they like to then organise an assessment. The assessment is carried out by somebody who usually works for Capita. Those people are very much on a time-limited function. So they, a bit like Amazon workers, they've got to do a certain number of cases within a certain time period. And a lot of the answers that they put in are selected from a drop-down menu. So when you get your form back, quite often people say, well, that's not what I said. But actually what they've done is try to match you as close as possible to their drop-down menu, because the drop-down menu saves them time in filling in their section when they're doing the assessment. You will then get back a notice to say that you've not been successful, and you're allowed to, you give the option to ask for a mandatory reconsideration. During the mandatory reconsideration, what will happen is an independent person from the Department of Work and Pensions will go over your application form, and then we'll go over the assessor's form and make sure that the assessor has completed the form correctly and make sure that they've scored it correctly. So they won't be in contact with you. They may not have a chat with you. They may not get more details off you. They're literally looking at making sure the forms have been filled in correctly and the point scoring has been done correctly at the end of that. Okay. If you then are not happy with that, you can appeal. If you appeal, in essence, what you're appealing is you're appealing the decision of the Department of Work and Pensions. And so the government in this country has set it up so that the decision of the Department of Work and Pensions is appealed to the Department of Justice. So in my previous role, I used to sit on the panel for that appeal of the Department of Justice. And what they do is they make sure that the law has been correctly applied. And that's why it goes to the Department of Justice. So what they will do is they will sit with the textbook open. And we used to get sent a kind of a 400- or 500-page textbook every 6 months because it updates quite regularly. But we sit with the textbook open at the right section. We quite often invite the applicant in, and then we ask them questions about their activities of daily living. So how do you function on a day-to-day basis? And based on those questions, we then see how they would have scored and whether their law has been applied correctly. In that appeal, there's no physical examination. So in the initial assessment with the Department of Work and Pensions, there may be a physical assessment of some sorts, but in the appeal with the Department of Justice, there's no physical examination. They literally just ask you questions about how you would live your normal day. And this is why, going back to the point we made at the very start, this application for the benefits is very much based on your function and not your diagnosis. And we can give a number of examples. I gave the one about heart attacks, but there are many more medical conditions where one person's end result of that condition is significantly worse than another. So, I think it's probably apt at the moment to say there are some people who get COVID and get no symptoms, and some people who get COVID, who get long COVID, who are massively disabled, who can't walk up the stairs in the house anymore. But just writing, I've had COVID, therefore I should get the benefit, doesn't really work. So from the point of view of the appeal, you should appeal. And you should make sure that you've got a copy of your application form, a copy of the decision, and you can put them side by side and you can go through them and write down clearly what you disagree with. But it's important at that stage to have help from Citizens Advice on Welfare Rights, because in essence, you want to make sure that what you're saying is different to what the assessors found, but is in keeping with the law that entitles you those points. Okay, so if the law says you only get the points for reason A, B, and C, and your actual argument doesn't fit with those reasons, you're not going to get the points even at appeal. If you go through the whole appeal process and you're still not successful, then you can reapply for the benefit, but you would have to find another reason or condition to apply under. So it doesn't suddenly stop and then there's the abyss. So you can reapply, but you will find that you may be met with the same challenges again, because although you can apply under numerous clinical conditions, the functional test remains the same. What you can do day to day doesn't really change. So for example, if I applied because I'd had 3 heart attacks, I didn't get the benefit, then I thought, well, I've also had a stroke, so I'll apply under that as well. My day-to-day living hasn't changed. The diagnosis that I put down in the form may have, but my day-to-day living hasn't changed. There was a question on the chat about appeals. I would suggest that if you are unsure about whether to appeal, you contact one of the benefits groups, the Welfare Rights or Citizens Advice, and that's the kind of point where I'd say maybe ask them to provide a bit of legal assistance, because you need somebody not only who understands the forms, but somebody who understands the legal element of what's being appealed. And you're appealing the decision of one government department and you're using another government department to appeal the decision. They will only look at the decision. They won't really go into the nitty-gritties of the detail. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. Quick question. Does income affect the DLA eligibility, i.e. would high earners receive the same amount as somebody for low earners for the same child?
The benefit is, sorry, go on.
Sorry, I was going to say the benefit is being awarded to the child, not to the family per se. So again, going back to the definition, this benefit is to allow the recipient to lead a normal life. So what additional needs or costs are needed to help that recipient lead a normal life? The DLA will help to support the family with buying those elements that require the child to lead a normal life. The PIP will allow the adult to lead a normal life. So it's not means tested, and I don't think it ever will be because of that definition, because it doesn't matter how wealthy you are, you will need some additional support to lead a normal life. You may be able to, instead of buying if you've got a mobility problem, instead of buying a basic mobility scooter, you might decide to get the Ferrari version. That's your choice to top up. But actually, from the point of view of the benefit system, it allows you to then use that benefit to get the basics of what you might need to lead a normal life.
Okay. And we've just had one other question, which is in the chat, and then we'll go on to some of the other questions that we've already had. I'm assuming it's been asked already, but if your child is being tube fed, is it worth trying to claim?
Yes, definitely. Definitely. Because my child was tube fed and it still is occasionally tube fed. He's still got the tube in place. But the number of times you wake up in the night and the tubes come out and the bed's soaking wet with milk, or they've pulled the tube, there's been a problem, or they get vomiting and aspiration because you've fed too fast, or got a concurrent illness and they've vomited or had sickness. or with TOF, because of the reflux symptoms, they suddenly get a cough and then they're vomiting through the night again, and you've got a week or two of reducing the feed, they get diarrhea. So there are multiple impacts of being tube fed that will actually lead to you having to provide much more care for your child than a child that's not tube fed, and therefore you should apply.
Okay, that's great, thank you. Right, so going back on to the points of being rejected from an appeal, on the same topic, my son is now 24 and was on DLA Lifetime Award until he was 22, and it didn't transfer to a PIP in August 2019 because he didn't receive enough points. We did appeal again and got the same points, so we gave up. What could we do now, 2 years on, to try again, to go on to DLA Lifetime, because it doesn't seem right being that,
so
that way.
The DLA doesn't exist for people over the age of 16. In the past, there was one benefit across the whole spectrum. It was called DLA, but now for under 16s, it's DLA, and that will gradually move to PIP across the spectrum. But the benefit that you're looking at is PIP. There is no DLA. And as Heather's kind of eloquently put before, PIP is very much based on points and function. And therefore, I think if you can look at the PIP form, take it to the Citizens Advice or the Welfare Rights, or sit with somebody who's got some knowledge about this, and fill out the relevant sections and try and stick to the sections that mostly apply to you, then you can apply again. I think you're going to find it a struggle if you haven't been able to meet the parameters in the past to do that again, apart from just trying to make it a bit more clear and going to appeal. So the appeal is the bit where you will get a medical person and a legal person sitting in front of you, and you can directly discuss the issues with them. And they may sometimes even give you some wider advice about benefits, but it is stressful. It's not, it is going to a magistrate's court in most occasions. It's not laid out like a magistrate's court. It's normally just a table and chair, but it's very much sitting across the table from somebody, and it can be, well, it is, not can be, it is very stressful, but it's worthwhile doing. I think in this case, what's happened is when you transition from DLA to PIP, it's not an automatic allocation, and that's what we're seeing in this case.
I think just to add to that, it doesn't state how much evidence the family have given. If they've not been able to evidence those functional needs, then that's the big part of the problem. If they're able to provide more evidence of how they're affected still in relation to the descriptors, using, as Cameron said earlier on, get into the habit of saying, can I have a copy of that clinic report, please? And keep hold of the clinic report. That will help if it shows that there is still some functional restriction. So it is important to think about your evidence for PIP as well.
Okay, that's great, thank you. Next question. Is the process difficult to become an appointee for my child regarding benefits? This question goes on to, we've been receiving high level care and low mobility DLA for years, but he's now 16 and we have to apply for a PIP for himself. The mum or dad feels that he's too young to apply for himself and will find it extremely difficult to talk about his health issues, as he's also transitioning from paediatric to adult services, which I know is a big minefield. And he's also starting his GCSEs. And this son is also a VACTIL with ongoing other issues as well as OA TOF. Heather.
Right. The actual process of becoming an appointee is really, really simple. Around about 3 months or so before the 16th birthday, the parents receive a letter explaining that it's now time for the child to be in charge of their own benefits if they're able to. Obviously, a lot of 16-year-olds would probably just blow it all on PlayStation games or cinema tickets or whatever. I mean, let's face it, and a lot of parents would say, well, actually, they're not capable because they're not responsible enough yet. If you've got a child with learning disability, it's a lot easier because you can state that the learning disability prevents them. But that isn't the case for a lot of children with TOF and OA, although that's my personal experience because of Robert. Pre-COVID, once you'd sent in the form, giving your explanation as to why you should be an appointee, you used to get a 5-minute visit and they just remind you of your legal responsibility. The money is for your child, not for you. You'd sign a form and off they'd go. And then you get a letter saying, yes, you've become an appointee, or no, you've not. With COVID, I believe that it's now being done by phone, but again, a fairly simple process, and the information is on the government website as well. Regarding the transition to adult services, you're very lucky if you've got adult services in a lot of cases. We were discharged from a major children's hospital to the care of the GP. And as Cameron said earlier, very often the GP cannot help because, you know, basically they don't have that knowledge or ability in such a specialist area. So the transition can vary across the country, to be perfectly honest. And I did read on the TOFS Facebook page, I think it was today, and I think it was St Mary's in Manchester, they're now having a transition clinic from child TOF services to adult TOF services, which I thought was absolutely brilliant. But it's something that I've not heard of before, and it does say, I think, on the thing that it's the first one. So the transition to adult services, it depends. In this case, the child has Bacterl, so it may well be that they go from a number of different surgeons and specialists onto the same area, but for adults. But in a lot of cases, there isn't a transition. It's a case of your GP will take over now.
Yeah, it's worth noting that we have paediatricians who are doctors that look after children, and we have geriatricians who are doctors that look after old people, but we don't have any adulticians, so anybody who'll look after an adult. And that tends to be the issue, because the paediatrician tends to be the person who will kind of keep hold of your child and then kind of point them in the right direction and signpost them to the right specialist. And similarly for geriatricians, they will do similar with elderly patients for memory assessments, dietitian, etc., for rehab and stuff. But we don't have that for adults. And in adults, you kind of, you can be sometimes passed from pillar to post. I think it's important, again, when you get copies of your clinic letters and when you're being discharged, that you have an understanding of the things that you need to watch out for with TOF. So we've had lots of the TOF conferences, lots of discussions about having camera tests done regularly, endoscopy tests to look at the gastroesophageal junction, and those need to be done by a gastric specialist. So that's probably the first person that I think should definitely be involved for adult TOFs. And then subsequent to that, obviously it depends from the Bacterl point of view. If you've got spinal abnormalities, you might need a spinal doctor or consultant, etc., etc. So it's definitely worth trying to work out a transition, but this is something the NHS, and somebody who works in the NHS, I can say, doesn't do very well, unfortunately, you know, in any field of the NHS. So it's good news to hear that it's happening with TOFs, to be fair. Brilliant.
Yeah, that's great. I'll have a look at Facebook later, because I haven't actually had a look today, so I'll see that when I'm looking later on.
Cool.
Last question, and obviously if anybody's got anything that they want to put in the chat function, obviously we can come back to those in a minute. But until the age of 10 or so, a TOF child can be particularly sick, particularly once that school begins. However, their condition can improve with age as they grow. What's your advice regarding DLA if the child appears to be getting better? Strictures can form and chest infections can increase, especially in the winter, despite the child growing. In other words, obviously, life has its ups and downs. They can get better, they can get worse. Does this affect a DLA application? Is it for life or basically till they're 16? And what do you think, obviously, if the child stabilizes, what should they do?
So I'll pick that up. In the first part of the assessment, when you fill out your form and it goes off to somebody who's going to do the assessment, if there's a clinical condition underlying, they will be able to make an assessment that, generally speaking, this person needs additional support most of the time because of their clinical diagnosis or issue. It's falls on you as the patient or the patient's family to report if the condition changes. So if the condition gets worse, obviously you would reapply, outlining what's got worse. So if they suddenly developed spinal problems and mobility issues, you could reapply under that. But actually, if the condition gets better, you should also inform the DLA that things have changed. So there are many people, especially in the PIP section rather than the DLA section, that it applies equally, who get caught out when their conditions have improved and they haven't notified the Department of Work and Pensions. So if the condition is one that waxes and wanes, you may not need to notify them so much, but if you've got a condition that's improved or has changed significantly, you should notify them of significant changes. When it comes to this particular example, the problem here goes back to what we said at the start about language. So on the application, they do look at how often something is affecting you. So for DLA, as Heather said earlier on, there's a certain percentage of time that the condition must affect you during a given day. And for PIP, there's a certain percentage of proportion of time during a given week that the condition must affect you for you to continue to, or either to apply or continue to receive the benefit. If you're somebody who gets really bad during the winter, but fine the rest of the year, you may find that you're not entitled because the law doesn't sit like that. In essence, on the application, you would put down that you occasionally get or that you frequently get, but it would not be sufficient to say it's more than half of the day or more than 50% of the week. So therefore, you wouldn't be entitled to the benefit, unfortunately. And that's the law trying to draw a black and white line out of something that is very much grey. So we can all agree that life is grey. It's very different for all of us. There's different shades, and every day can be different. But this is the law trying to draw a line in that.
I'm just looking at something that's come up in the chat that refers to this question, Cameron, about care not being evenly distributed. A child almost 3 months old may be eligible for low DLA care. In theory, all they have is to receive omeprazole every day, but in reality, they've been hospitalised 6 times in the first 12 weeks, scheduled surgery due to stretches and chest infections. Some days will have been less than an hour a day compared to other children, but accumulatively, it will even out at an extra hour a day. Is that okay?
Yeah, so what I would say is when you fill out the application form, it does say to you, how often does this happen? And it's quite often worth just thinking about that and saying, okay, what's a really bad week? What's a good week? And what's in between? And trying to get somewhere that's a fair reflection of how often something happens. And trying to guesstimate what that is. Now, if you're treading the line, so if you think you're 45% rather than 50%, I would probably err towards the caution and say put it on 50%. But it will be for children, what you tend to find is you get a reassessment every year, and that may be a paper-based exercise, but it's upon you to then tell them that something has changed. So if the following year things have been much better as your child grows, the esophagus has grown a little bit, they haven't needed stretches, so they're one of the lucky ones, then actually you should put that down. If not a lot has changed, then you can go back, as I said before, if you've got a PDF form, just make a minor amendment to the form, send it back and say not a lot has changed, then that should continue. But as I said, it's very difficult. You've got to understand it from the other side. From the side of parents, it's difficult. From the other side, it's very difficult because what life is very grey, and they're really trying to put a marker in the sand to say this is the line on which we make the decision.
I also think that in something like this, I fully agree with what you're saying, but in something like this, I would actually still apply, and I would put down how frequently they've been admitted and put along the lines of, we do not know how long this will continue, assuming that the doctors haven't been able to say, right, next week's definitely the last one, which obviously they can't do. So I would still apply, and I would explain it like that, and the decision maker will be able to have a look at it and go from the information you've given.
And you as I said before, you get clinic letters. You're also entitled to a copy of your discharge letter. So again, this is a good example, good situation where you should include copies of your discharge letter, because if you've been in and out of A&E multiple times or in and out of hospital multiple times, even if it's for an overnight stay, then that it'll be in the discharge letter, awaiting stretch. And a lot of children are on the waiting list at the moment for a stretch, and they'll say awaiting stretch, vomiting episode, and then another one, awaiting stretch, vomiting episode, coughing episode, awaiting stretch, and you'll keep getting a series of those until they can get you in and do the stretch. Get all of those, put them in the application form so they know that you're going through 3 months of hell sometimes, right? But they need to know at the other end that that's happened, for them to get an appreciation that this can happen at any time. And when it does happen, it is the majority of your time spent dealing with this, and therefore they take that into account.
Right. We're fastly approaching 8 o'clock, so, and that seems to naturally come to a conclusion. So can I say thank you to all three of you for your time tonight, and obviously giving off your advice and everything else that you've given. You know, it's been really, you know, worthwhile listening to it, and obviously gathering lots of information. So thank you to all three of you for your time. Obviously, if anybody else wants any more information, obviously, please do talk to Di, talk to Sophie in the office. Obviously, they can try and answer you some questions, or obviously they can forward your questions on to Cameron or to Heather or to Caroline to try and obviously get you an answer if it's something that they can't answer to all.